Look at the day's headlines. Is North Korea rebuilding its missile test facility? Satellite images suggest it might be, but US President Donald Trump urges against jumping to conclusions. However, Trump admits if true, he'd be very disappointed in Kim Jong-un. 7 straight days of emergency anti-fine dust measures. The air is thick with smog yet again as the government scrambles to find new ways to clean up the skies above South Korea. Plus, setting the stage for a potential clash with the US, Italy is set to join China's massive One Belt, One Road project, becoming the first G7 nation to do so. We start this morning in Washington following reports that new movements have been detected at North Korea's key missile launch site. US President Donald Trump says he wouldn't be best pleased with the North Korean leader if the regime is indeed rebuilding the site. Kim Hyo-sun starts us off.
President Trump has stressed he would be, quote, very disappointed if North Korea is reassembling parts of its Dongchangli missile site, which was previously used to test engines for the regime's ICBMs. Speaking at the White House on Wednesday, Trump also cautioned it was a very early report.
But I would be very, very disappointed in Chairman Kim, and I don't think I will be, but we'll see what happens. We'll take a look. It'll ultimately get solved.
New satellite images revealed by U.S.-based North Korea monitoring website 38 North suggest the regime began rebuilding the launch site just days after the Hanoi summit ended prematurely with no agreement. While no movement was detected since August last year, recent satellite imagery shows new work took place between February 16th and March 2nd. 2 cranes were added to the site, while the rail-mounted transfer building has also been rebuilt with new walls and a roof. Materials that had been seen stacked next to a building a few months ago also appear to have been removed. Responding to the latest developments, the U.S. State Department says the North will stick to its denuclearization pledge as promised between the leaders of both sides. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The top nuclear envoys of South Korea, the United States and Japan are set for trilateral talks in Washington to discuss the next steps after the second North Korea-US summit. The talks were confirmed by the US State Department, who told Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency that US Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun will meet bilaterally and trilaterally with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts. Seoul's top nuclear envoy, Lee Do-hoon, arrived in Washington on Tuesday for a 3-day stay. Japan will be represented by Kenji Kanasugi. Emergency fine dust reduction measures remain in force for South Korea to tackle the thick air pollution that's enveloped the nation. The Environment Ministry says measures have been issued for 8 cities and provinces, including Seoul and the surrounding metropolitan area, as well as parts of Chungcheongdo province. The government also plans to roll out additional measures to reduce fine dust levels, as this is the first time emergency measures have been in place for 7 straight days since these measures were first introduced 2 years ago. Under intense public pressure to clean up the air, President Moon Jaein on Wednesday demanded that his officials work with China to try and tackle the problem. Shin Se-min reports.
President Moon Jaein proposed working with China in tackling the bad air quality that has become a national crisis on Wednesday, the 6th straight day since the emergency fine dust measures were imposed.
President Moon Jaein this morning ordered to arrange emergency countermeasures with China to minimize the fallout of the fine dust particles coming in from the neighboring country.
China had been blamed for a large portion of the dirty air and yellow dust that blows in onto the Korean peninsula, leading to a sharp rise in air pollution. The South Korean leader proposed a joint project with China to use artificial rain to wash away the fine dust particle from the air, something that he says have already been agreed upon by the environment ministers of the two sides. He also told his aides to discuss measures to lower dust levels with Beijing to improve the effectiveness of the country's steps. On a more local level, the president also raised the possibility of allocating an emergency supplementary budget to help reduce the air pollution across the nation. If approved, that extra fund will be used to add more air purifiers at public places like schools and expand financial support for joint projects with China. And to reduce the amount of homegrown dust, the president ordered the administration to consider the early decommissioning of coal-fired power plants more than 30 years old, in addition to banning old diesel cars from the country's roads. Despite aggressive measures to tackle the country's bad air quality, questions still linger on whether these measures are enough to bring down the country's fine dust levels by 30% by the end of 2022, just as the president had promised. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, it's fair to say we've all been feeling rather miserable here in South Korea during this prolonged period of atrocious air pollution. Fortunately, for most of us, we either work inside most of the time or can stay home with the air purifier on. However, it is a different story for those who have to work outside all day, especially if part of their job is communicating with others. Choi Si-young reports.
A new addition to people's must-have items before heading out, a face mask. The horrific air quality in South Korea over the past week has made it routine to wear a face mask when venturing outside, to primarily protect our lungs from the harmful dust. But for workers who spend most of their workday outside, wearing a mask the whole time isn't a practical, easy, or especially comfortable experience.
I can't breathe well wearing a face mask all day while I'm driving, nor can I keep my car window shut all the time.
Merchants at street stalls in downtown Seoul find themselves in a dilemma. They are directly exposed to the hazardous air for hours on end, yet they cannot simply put a mask on.
With a face mask on, I can't communicate easily with customers, so I take it off. But then I have this sore throat and keep coughing.
The situation isn't all that different at a bigger, mostly indoor market that attracts a large number of customers. Here at a large traditional market in downtown Seoul, merchants are exposed to high levels of ultrafine dust as particles blow in through this large entrance gate. Merchants who sell goods at the traditional market say they are as exposed to the pollution as those who work outside on street stalls. They profess similar frustration with the dilemma of wearing a face mask. Some go further, calling for strong actions to be taken.
I think a ventilation fan or a water spraying cleaner that hoses down the floor would help reduce ultrafine dust levels in the market.
Suggestions like that are something else for the government to mull over as it faces the daunting task of cleaning up the air we breathe. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
Italy is set to join China's massive One Belt, One Road project, becoming the first G7 nation to do so. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Noah Adam. So Adam, this could actually set the stage for a clash with the United States.
That's right, Mark. Washington has expressed concerns over the news, saying it could harm Rome's international image. The White House also said the move would not help Italy's economy. Rome is preparing to sign an MOU later this month when it hosts Chinese President Xi Jinping. However, there have been conflicting views from within the Italian government as well. Junior Industry Minister Michele Geraci said that if Italy did sign an accord, it would be non-binding and just what he called an initial framework. Another junior minister cautioned against any such move, saying more thought had to be given about national security. President Xi's One Belt, One Road initiative aims to link China with a host of continents by sea and land through an infrastructure network on the lines of the old Silk Road. Aside from boosting trade and investment, Xi aims to advance exchanges in areas such as science, technology and culture. The United States has been apprehensive towards the project over fears that China could use it for espionage. The EU is also expressing caution. The bloc's spokesperson said it was cooperating with Beijing on the initiative, but insisted this was on the grounds that China sticks to EU and international rules. The US trade deficit with the rest of the world jumped to a 10-year high last year. This comes despite President Trump's America First policies aimed at shrinking the trade gap and increasing American exports. Data from the US Commerce Department showed the deficit in 2018 soared to $621 billion. The deficit in goods and services during December also hit a near 10-year high of nearly $60 billion. The rise was in part due to factors out of President Trump's control, such as a global economic slowdown and a relatively strong greenback. Both have weakened foreign demand for American goods and services. But Trump's $1.5 billion tax cut and the trade war he escalated last year have also played a part. 2 universities in Britain have been evacuated after reports of suspicious packages being found within their grounds. Wednesday's incidents came just a day after parcel bombs were sent to 2 airports and a train station in London. It is not yet clear if the 2 incidents are linked. Police in eastern England said they cordoned off parts of University of Essex and evacuated some buildings. The same happened at the University of Glasgow in Scotland after a suspicious package was found in the mail room. The nature of the packages is still unknown.
Now, South Korea's National Assembly will convene its March parliamentary session this afternoon, bringing an end to a 2-month-long standstill. During the month-long session, the chiefs of the country's 3 main political parties will give policy speeches. There'll be a questioning session of government ministries, and there's also a pile of pending bills to work through. The parties have agreed to first work on non-contested bills related to the fine dust crisis and have them ready for a full floor vote next Wednesday. The policy chiefs of each party will be meeting this afternoon as well to agree on the most urgent bills that need to be passed. Another pending issue is the reform of the country's electoral system. The OECD has cut its growth outlook for South Korea's economy this year amid a slowdown in global trade. Moon Jaein with the details.
The OECD on Wednesday released its growth outlook for South Korea's economy in 2019, projecting it to be 2.6%. It said the cut was mainly due to a slowdown in global trade. The OECD's previous estimate for South Korea last November was 2.8%. It also said on Wednesday that South Korea's economy will grow 2.6% in 2020, down from its previous forecast of 2.9%. According to the OECD Interim Economic Outlook, South Korea's continued fiscal easing and low inflation should support demand, but exports have slowed sharply, especially to Asian markets. South Korea's outbound shipments slumped by more than 11% on year last month, the 3rd straight month that exports have contracted. The numbers suggest South Korea might struggle to reach $600 billion in exports for the 2nd straight year in 2019. The OECD's downward revision comes a matter of days after Moody's slashed its growth outlook for the South Korean economy to 2.1%, citing a weakening investment cycle, the deceleration in global trade, as well as lower demand in China for intermediate products. However, South Korea is not alone. The OECD says the economic prospects are now weaker in nearly all G20 nations than previously anticipated. It attributed the shaky figures to vulnerabilities in China, the weakening European economy, combined with a slowdown in trade and global manufacturing, high policy uncertainty, and risks in financial markets. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea's top automaker is considering plans to shut one of its 5 plants in China amid weakening sales in the top Asian market. Hyundai Motor says it's leaning towards closing one of its 3 plants in Beijing, which can produce up to 300,000 cars annually. The move could threaten 2,000 jobs in the city. Hyundai Motor has been suffering a slump in sales following a diplomatic row between Seoul and Beijing over the deployment of a US missile defense system to South Korea. Hyundai Motor has been making moves into Southeast Asia and other emerging markets, beginning with a joint venture with a Vietnamese company. President Moon Jaein says he hopes peace on the Korean Peninsula will ensure a more prosperous and peaceful future for ASEAN member nations as well. Writing a special contribution to the Asia News Network ahead of his week-long trip to the region next week, the president said cooperation between Seoul and ASEAN will further expand into the fields of ICT, transport and defence. He added the leaders of ASEAN and himself share a vision of people, prosperity and peace. The South Korean leader says he hopes relations continue to blossom as 2019 marks the 30th anniversary of dialogue between the two sides. President Moon leaves for a three-nation trip to Brunei, Cambodia and Malaysia this weekend. After almost 12 months behind bars, one of South Korea's former presidents, Myungbak, was granted bail on Wednesday. As the trial over his alleged corruption and bribery charges rumbles on, the court made sure to lay down some tough ground rules for the former leader. Oh Soo-young reports.
Former President Lee Myung-bak was released on bail on Wednesday, almost a year after he was jailed on corruption charges. The Seoul High Court approved a conditional release after Lee's attorney sought bail for health reasons. While rejecting claims of Lee's illness, the court said it considered the fact that Lee's appeals trial is unlikely to wrap up before his detention period ends next month. Without a house arrest, Lee would be freed without any conditions, which could risk him tampering with evidence. In exchange for the $886,000 bail, Lee has agreed to stay within the confines of his residence. He has also been banned from meeting or communicating with anyone other than his immediate family and legal team. Hospital visits will also have to be approved. Lee was sentenced to 15 years in prison after a lower court in October last year found him guilty of owning an auto parts company, creating an $11 million slush fund, as well as taking bribes from Samsung in return for the release of its chairman Lee Gon-hee. The 77-year-old has denounced the allegations as political retaliation by the country's liberals and has sought an appeal on his prison term ever since. Lee served as South Korea's president from 2008 to 2013. His successor Park Geun-hye was also jailed and sentenced after a massive corruption scandal resulted in her impeachment. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, medical tourism is seen as one of South Korea's most promising new economic growth engines, attracting patients from around the world. And a recent survey shows that most foreigners are generally satisfied with the services they receive. Won Jung-hwan reports.
More and more medical tourists are showing their satisfaction with the healthcare services they receive from South Korea. This, according to a Ministry of Health and Welfare survey of some 1,200 people who visited South Korea for treatment last year. It showed an average satisfaction grade of 90 out of 100 for the medical service they received in the country. And the figure has been gradually rising since 2012. According to the survey, Korea received high marks for services provided by medical staff members and hospital facilities, whereas medical expenses and communication skills were graded slightly lower compared to other categories. On factors taken into account when selecting a medical tourism destination, respondents said skilled medical workers are the most important factor, followed by the reliability of the country's medical infrastructure and foreign language services. The report also showed the average amount spent by foreigners for medical tourism visits to South Korea. They spent an average of nearly $1,500 per visit to the country, which includes medical fees and expenses on flight and accommodation. By nation, visitors from the Middle Eastern countries spend the most, at nearly $4,500 per visit. Meanwhile, according to a separate report from the Korea Tourism Organization, international medical tourists ranked Korea third on their list of favorite destinations. And with satisfaction on the rise, South Korea can look forward to becoming one of the world's premier destinations for medical tourism in the near future. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
A special photo exhibition about Japan's wartime sexual slavery of Korean women has opened here in Seoul. It features photos and testimonies of victims from both South and North Korea. Lee Min-sun was there and files this report.
In 1992, two women from South and North Korea embraced one another at a hearing held in Tokyo. They were victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery, and the moment symbolized the unity between two Koreas in seeking redress from the injustices they suffered during the colonial era. The picture is now on display in Central Seoul as part of a special photo exhibition of comfort women from both South and North Korea. It is the first time that photos of North Korean victims are on public display. Japanese photojournalist Takashi Ito visited North Korea over 10 times since his first visit to Pyongyang 17 years ago, and met with victims of Japan's wartime sex slavery. He is the only person who has met face-to-face with 14 North Korean comfort women to hear their testimonies.
Because I'm a Japanese man, some victims were hard on me. A woman with a scarf on her head came straight to me and told me her experience.
One of the victims that he vividly remembers was Jung Ok-sun, who was still carrying physical scars and tattoos forcefully branded on her by the Japanese.
I thought she was being fashionable with her scarf, but later I learned that she was hiding scars left behind by a Japanese soldier. Her bodies and even the inside of her mouth were covered in tattoos.
He hopes the exhibition can raise awareness on the unheard voices of North Korean victims across the world. The exhibition also features photos and stories told by 10 comfort women from South Korea, compiled by documentary filmmaker An Hae-ryung. An presented them next to each other in careful sequence that focused on the emotional dimensions of the surviving victims. The exhibition, with about 40 photographs on display, will run until March 11 and is open to the public for free. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
Good morning. The picture behind me was taken yesterday on Jeju Island, and those clean blue skies are something all of us in Korea are hoping for. And some welcome news, we are supposed to see better air conditions by the afternoon. The ultrafine dust advisory has been lifted here in the capital, and the rest of the country will also see better air as the day goes on today. Temperature-wise, morning lows remain on the chilly side. Readings were a few notches lower than yesterday, while highs will continue to hover in the low teens today and for the next few days. And taking a closer look at today's daily highs, readings will range from 10 to 14 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Seoul will top out at 12 degrees. Much-needed nationwide rainfall is expected on Sunday, while temperature differences between lows and highs will continue to be wide. But sadly, we could see fine dust levels going up again this weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all the news we have for now on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. Do stay tuned to us on Arirang TV. We'll have our next newscast at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. Until then, goodbye.